It was Thursday night in November of 2021, and our family was getting together after a very long time. I went up to Vermont to be with my family for Thanksgiving and stayed with them for the weekend. Our Thanksgiving wasn't huge since our family's so spread out over the East Coast. It was my parents, my older brother, his girlfriend, my aunt and uncle, and myself. The house was big enough to accommodate all of us. We had our family tradition of watching a movie together after dinner with a fireplace going. After the movie, we had ice cream and played cards. Around 11, everyone started to get situated wherever they were sleeping. My brother and his girlfriend took one of the 2 spare bedrooms. My aunt and uncle took the second. There was a nice pull-out couch in the living room that I was sleeping on, which I didn't mind. I liked being able to sleep by the fireplace and tree. It was very cozy. I had the TV on as I was nodding off. When I felt that I was about to fall asleep, I turned off the TV. Fire was breathing its last breaths, and the room was just about pitch black. My memory faded into a dream that shook me. I was in the same house, same dining room, and same dinner, but with no lights on, and an eerie shadow of a person dressed in ghoulish clothes standing at the corner of the room. We were at the dinner table, when suddenly all of my family members in my dream stopped talking, turned, and looked at me. My Aunt Melissa said in a very serious voice, "There's someone in the house. Wake up." I jolted up quite abruptly after this, and my heart was racing. I was all sweaty, lying on the pull-out couch. The way my dream ended genuinely disturbed me. I looked around the dark room, feeling uncomfortable. The super high ceiling of the living room made me feel even more exposed. I heard a creak on the floor where the kitchen and living room meet. I looked in that direction. The fire was completely out now. There was no light in the room, yet I thought I could see a person standing right where the kitchen started. I said, "Is someone there?" expecting one of my family members to answer back, but they didn't. The silhouette-looking shadow in the doorway of the kitchen was still there, though. I sat up just a little more to look closer at the doorway. The silhouette then started moving. It was a person. "Who is that?" I said louder. Whoever it was went towards the back door, and I heard the back door close. I didn't scream or wake any of my family members, and I went back to the couch thinking that whoever it was is gone now. On my way back to the couch, I went to the dining room. And when I looked at the table, I was reminded of the disturbing dream I had. I shrugged it off and poured some water to drink. As I was drinking my water, I subconsciously looked at the corner of the room where I saw that scary shadow of a person dressed in those same disgusting old clothes. And just like that, the ominous shadow of the person from my dream was standing there. The glass of water fell from my hand and crashed on the floor. I started shivering, seeing that frightening person standing at the corner of the room, hidden in the shadows, looking right at me. As I was shivering, I looked back, and there she was, Aunt Melissa, with the same serious expression, looking right at me and said, "I told you, someone's in the house!" I was startled to see my aunt on one side of the room and an ominous, scary person on the other side, hidden in the shadows, both looking right at me. All of a sudden, the shadowy person started moving and came into the dim light to expose himself. He was a terrifying-looking man. His face was all bruised and his head was bleeding badly. He was holding a bag made of cloth in his hand, and blood was dripping out of it. I couldn't figure out what he was keeping in that bag. I just wanted to run, but I fell on the ground, injuring myself from the crushed glass on the floor. I was laying there on the floor, screaming with my eyes closed. I woke everyone up, and when they came to my aid, I told them everything I saw. I told them that Aunt Melissa was there and saw the man too, so you can all ask her about it. But my aunt denied it and said she was sleeping in her room. My uncle confirmed that she was indeed asleep next to him. I was petrified. They found footprints in the house, and the place where the disturbing and creepy person was standing had blood stains on the floor. We called the police, and while we waited for them, my brother and I stood in the backyard watching the woods. In the eerie, pitch-black woods, we saw someone was hiding behind the trees looking back at us. Later, the town confirmed the sighting of an unknown person who had abducted several kids, and they had found some bodies in the woods, but some were still missing. The night we experienced something that left our whole family in shock was Thanksgiving in 2017, a cold night in November. The air was crisp, and the scent of roasted turkey wafted through the house as we gathered for our annual Thanksgiving dinner. It was a night of warmth, laughter, and family. Or so I thought. We were hosting the dinner at our house that year, and I insisted my parents call every member of our family. My parents did as I asked, and they all agreed to come, except for a distant cousin of mine who didn't respond to any of the text or calls. We assumed he might be busy, and we enjoyed the night with all who did come, unaware of the chilling events that would unfold that night. Our family had gathered at our ancestral home, a creaky old mansion that echoed with the whispers of generations past. We sat around the table, sharing stories and passing dishes, dining with familiar faces and loved ones. Yet one seat remained empty. It was my cousin Jared's place, who didn't respond to any of us and was allegedly missing. He was always a bit of a private person, so it was likely of him to miss a family gathering, especially on Thanksgiving when there's a crowd of people around. Yet everyone around was concerned, and my mother tried calling Jared repeatedly, but he didn't answer. As we began to accept his absence and settle into the festivities, a sudden swish of wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles on the dining table. The doorbell rang, a sound that reverberated through the silent house, and all of us started looking at each other. The timing was eerie, considering that we had given up on Jared joining us. My uncle, his father, rushed to answer the door. As the door creaked open, everyone had their eyes locked on it. There stood Jared, his silhouette barely visible against the inky darkness outside. His disheveled appearance sent shivers down my spine, and his eyes reflected an emptiness that chilled me to the bone. He stepped in and didn't seem fine. His gait was unsteady, as if he was being controlled by unseen hands. "Jared, where have you been? We were worried sick!" my aunt exclaimed, rushing toward him. But he remained silent, a haunting silence that hung in the air like a dense fog. As we brought him to the dining table, the atmosphere shifted. The warmth of the room went cold. Jared's behavior grew increasingly bizarre. He picked up his food and ate it like an animal. His eyes were vacant and distant. It was making it difficult to ignore the discomfort that had settled in the pit of our stomachs. The unease deepened as he started mumbling something that none of us could understand. He seemed to hint at something that was far more sinister than what we were looking at. It was as if he had glimpsed into a demonic realm and brought back something dark. Midway through the meal, the light started to flicker. Jared had food all over his mouth, and he was staring at every member of the family with anger and rage filled in his eyes. I couldn't shake the feeling that the presence within him was not Jared anymore. His movements became increasingly erratic. All of a sudden, plates on the table began to quiver and then collapsed on the floor. All of us stood up. The once joyous occasion had turned into a nightmarish drama. Jared stood up as well and ambled towards the main door. Every one of us was looking at him as he stepped out of the house into the darkness. My uncle followed him outside, but he was nowhere to be seen. All of us spent that night in a tormented state that Jared left us in. None of us had a minute of sleep. And the very next morning, my father, my uncle, and I headed off to Jared's place. It was about a 4-hour drive. When we got there, we saw something that was engraved into our memory, and we still get traumatized by the memory of that sight. It was Jared, dead on the sofa. Neighbors called the police because of the smell, and the police had just arrived when we got there. Neighbors told us that they had been hearing Jared's screams for the past few nights, and then everything went quiet about 3 days ago. No one knew the reason for those mysterious and horrifying clamors that came from Jared's house every night. Police told us that Jared had been dead for at least a couple of days, considering the state of his body. Yet, the mystery of his death and his tragic appearance at our Thanksgiving dinner remains unsolved. It was a shock for our family to lose him on what was supposed to be a joyous occasion. This incident happened when I was about 13 years old. I remember that year we were hosting Thanksgiving at our house. People were going to start coming over in the afternoon, and my parents were up late preparing food the night before while my sister and I were helping clean up the house. We had a 2-story house. All the bedrooms were upstairs, and downstairs were the main living room, the kitchen, the dining room, and a few others. We had a basement too, but no one had ever been in it, since our parents forbade us to go down there. We used to hear loud thuds and mysterious knocks from the basement, but we never went to see what caused it. It was said to be haunted by an evil presence. At least, that was the reason for the previous owner's mysterious death, but was ignored by my father while buying the property. Anyhow, our house was sort of big, and it was a good place to have a bunch of people over, especially for Thanksgiving. We invited all our family members to our place, and Thanksgiving Day was a great success. It was lovely to see family members that I hadn't seen in a while. But things took a tragic turn later that night. My parents, along with other family members, went out for some reason, and they left me, my cousin Emily, and my sister Abigail at home. They said they would be back in a moment. It must have been like 11 p.m. or so. Probably like 30 minutes later, I heard something outside of my room. Something like a loud thud. I ignored it, got out of bed, walked into the hallway to use the bathroom. When I did, I noticed that my sister's bedroom door was open, and she didn't appear to be inside of it. I could sort of hear the TV playing downstairs, and I figured that she must be downstairs. I used the bathroom, and then went downstairs. I looked around for my sister, but she was nowhere to be seen. I went into the kitchen, but she wasn't there either. I guessed that maybe she'd gone with my parents. I returned to the living room towards the couch. Then, I heard a noise. It sounded like a whisper. I was startled. And then I heard it again. It was my cousin Emily's voice. It sounded like she was behind the couch. I looked behind it and I saw her. She was all curled up into almost a ball and looked terrified. She whispered to me that she was talking to my sister Abigail when suddenly they heard a knock from the basement. They went to explore it, and as they did, Abigail opened the basement door and unleashed the evil inside. Emily said that Abigail had started behaving strangely and was talking in a heavy, devilish voice. That's why Emily was hiding from my sister behind the couch, as she was terrified of Abigail. I whispered to Emily, asking where Abigail was. As she was about to say, I heard a heavy growl from the basement. Emily said, "That's her! It's Abigail! I don't know how she's making that noise, but it's her!" I couldn't leave Abigail in the basement by herself, so I went to see her. As I entered the lounge, everything in the lounge started trembling as if an earthquake had hit us. As I got closer to the basement, the only way in was a door, covered with chains that Abigail had opened. The chain was moving, and the door was continuously banging again and again. And from inside, I could hear Abigail laughing in a very heavy male voice. I could see her face slightly in the darkness. As I opened my cell phone light, I saw someone standing just behind Abigail, holding her tight with her hair, and Abigail was laughing like a maniac. That evil presence had a creepy smile on its face and was looking right at me. As I entered the basement, it loosened its grip on Abigail's hair and said,
Get out of here or I will kill you all.
I grabbed Abigail and took her out. I was stunned that it didn't do anything to me. My sister had collapsed, so I picked Abigail up and we rushed out of the basement and into the driveway. Right after we got outside, we saw our parents' car driving down the street and pulling in. That was great to see, and we both ran out to them. They barely had a chance to get in the driveway, and they seemed confused to see us running out of the house. We got inside the back seats of the car and told them about seeing a guy inside the house. My dad saw the basement door open and knew what had happened. Abigail had to go through some work with the priest to free her from the devil that was in our basement. We left the house immediately after that incident, but we couldn't forget what happened that night. My sister still gets nightmares.